Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. We'll just wait a bit to see if anybody else is joining us. But what a fascinating webinar we're going to have today. My name is Tarquin Follis. I'm the Vice Chairman of SASIG. I'm not Callum Fraser. He is much more good looking than me. Anybody who's attended the Escape the Room digital events will know that. Unfortunately, Callum is stuck on a train, so I'm stepping in for him this morning. And we'll keep you posted on whether he escapes that particular trap or not. Anyway, as I said, good morning. I'm calling in from just west of Salisbury, where the sun is shining and it's a bit chilly. And what I suggest, if you want to just send a note to everybody, please make sure it goes to everybody, just to say where you're calling in from, and then we'll continue. And today we've got an excellent presentation. I can't think of a more appropriate one, by Alessandro from BSI on the issues about how people get round, or bad actors get round, solutions. And given that we are encouraged by NCSC to monitor our environment, I can't think of a more appropriate discussion today from Alessandro, so I'm really looking forward to it. Next slide, please. So that's me, and a big thank you to all our supporters. We couldn't do this without our supporters. They are absolutely brilliant, and there they all are. In fact, BSI supporting us will be talking today. Next slide, please. So we've got quite a few interesting webinars coming up this week. On Wednesday, we've got a webinar on diversity in cyber teams given by Lisa Ventura. That should be really good, really appropriate, as it follows so much after our skills festival. On the 21st of October, we have the Chief's Brief with Mark Hughes, who's currently President of Security at DXC and used to be Head of Security at BT and is an old friend. And on the the Monday the 24th, we have a presentation on the state of cybercrime, threats and trends, which will be given by Tom from Veronis. And finally, to round off that period, on the Tuesday, the 25th of October, we have a webinar on using intelligence to drive operations, given by Shannon from Mandiant. That should be a fascinating discussion as well. Next slide, please. So what's on our agenda in terms of other events? Well, tomorrow's a big day. We've got our SASIG Cybersecurity Skills Festival. We're running that in conjunction with the Cybersecurity Council, and it is really important. And we hope that this will help in meeting the challenges in the UK that we have about marrying skills to jobs. So if you're not already signed up for this, please do sign up for it. That's happening tomorrow. That's going to be on virtually all day. And in parallel to that, we're going to be having a load of discussions. Professor Simon Hepburn from the Cybersecurity Council of the UK will be giving a keynote speech, and we'll have other discussions going throughout the day. So definitely worth signing up for that. On the Thursday, the 27th of October, we've got Organizing Threat Intelligence and Planning Incident Response. Again, that's an in-person event. Please do sign up for it. Should be a really good one. On the 1st of November, for all the charities and not-profits, I can't think of a more appropriate one to come and join. This is again another in-person event in London at Witch's headquarters, which will be on cybersecurity specifically for charities and non-profits. And finally, on the 3rd of November, it's going to be a busy week that week, we have another event in person in Birmingham, which is reaching out to the boardroom. I was at a conversation last week, and most of the people involved, an event last week, most of the people involved in that were really fascinated by that. That's still a big issue in terms of getting cybersecurity to the forefront of boardroom thinking. And that's going to take place in Birmingham, hosted by BT. So please do, if you want to come on to that, please, there's still opportunity to sign up for that. Next slide, please. Right, as you can say, you can find us on most of the social media. We have our own website. We're also on LinkedIn, and we are also on Twitter. Next slide, please. House rules today, as always with our events. I mean, it's a challenge on a webinar, but we would ask you to really respect the Chatham House rule. Our speakers speak frankly, and we want to encourage them to do that. And we've got to have the right behaviors by ourselves and responsibilities to ensure that that happens. Please feel free to ask questions. There's a questions box, Q&A box. That's where you can ask questions. Please also feel free to put anything in the chat to the rest of the participants here. We've got a good crowd today. The webinar will be recorded and will be available for members to get access to. And finally, what I would say is, please, we will be sending feedback at the end of the webinar presentation. Please do fill it in. It's absolutely vital for us and for Alessandro and any of our other speakers to understand how well that was received, so that we can ensure that what we're putting out is relevant to you. And finally, the last thing I would say is, please get your teams to join SASIC. It's free. As you know, you're all part of it. You know exactly the value of it. Please get them to join us. As we say, I think at the gala dinner, we've given ourselves a total. We're at the moment 7,500 members. We're hoping to get up to 10,000 by next year, and your help will be much appreciated in achieving that goal. Next slide, please. So let's get on to today's webinar, which I've got Alessandro here. And Alessandro, can I hand it over to you?
Yes, of course. With your permission, I'll start sharing my slides then. But it seems like I cannot share my screen if there is already a screen sharing in place. And yes. So thanks a lot for joining in the meantime, but Claire, I need, okay, perfect. And I think I can start sharing now. Perfect. Hopefully you can see my slides. And thanks a lot for joining this talk. I want to apologize with everyone. This talk should have been initially a huge showcase about EDR bypass techniques, and with the demo about actually establish a C2 connection back to an attacker control machine and then exfiltrate data real time. But because BSI is a vendor neutral organization, I can't actually share technical data by actually showcasing an EDR bypass. So we'll cover more the engineering process about how we, Retimer, and potentially threat actors are actually engineering the bypass techniques against EDR solution. And hopefully at the end of this talk, we'll be able to understand if AV and EDR solutions are actually enough to protect an organization from an advanced threat actor and advanced attacks. So a little introduction about myself. I'm Alessandro Magnosi. I'm a principal consultant by day. At least I'm a principal consultant in BSI, where I mainly involved with red teaming, malware developing, and source code reviews. By night, I go by the name Virus, and I'm an offensive security open source developer for Pocketa Industry, where I actually maintain a few tools. Probably the most famous are Inceptor and 6whispers3. There are actually framework around AV and EDR bypass. And I'm a bug bounty hunter on CNAC Red Team. If you want to reach out to say hi, I'm available. I don't mind. Reach me out on Twitter. I'm always there. So the agenda for today is pretty straightforward. We will start by giving a sort of definition about EDR, IV, and EDR solutions, what they are, what kind of protection we should expect by them, and what we shouldn't expect from AV and EDR. Then we will give just a very short introduction about the Maitre Ingenuity Framework and what we should expect by this evaluation, how we can actually interpret these results, and what we should be careful about when we are trying to evaluate, when we are trying to interpret the results of this framework. And then we will see how actually endpoint protection platform and EDR performs in real scenarios against real attacks and real threat actors. After that, we will actually go into more direct insight and how actually we are engineering our evasion techniques against these solutions, and how we actually how we're able to actually find and exploit loopholes in these products. And toward the end, we will actually, I will give you some hints, both to vendors and to customers, but even to security testing provider, to actually be able to always improve an organization's security posture. So let's crack on. What are AV and EDR solutions? So we always talk about detection, prevention, what they are, and what are their definitions. So antivirus is very difficult to actually attribute the definition of antivirus. The terms was probably coined around the 80s when the first computer virus was discovered. And an antivirus is kind of self-explanatory. Is a piece of software which is designed and developed to act against malicious software. And what it should do is detecting it, preventing from triggering, and remove it before it does any damage to an endpoint. For EDR, the definition is kind of tricky. There is still a debate to actually understand what an EDR is and what it should do. But if we stand to the original term coined in 2013 by the Gartner analyst Anton Chuvakin, what is an EDR, or sometimes called ETDR, endpoint threat detection and response, is just a software that is installed on an endpoint that monitors continually the endpoint, and that usually collecting all the events happening on this endpoint can figure out if there is something malicious happening and stop it, or detect it and just provide an hunter, a defender, with the enough information to actually help the mitigation of this cyber threat. So of course, from the 80s, AV undergone a lot of evolution. So back in the days, what an AV was just a piece of software relying on static signatures to detect malicious binaries. So back in the day, what was a malware infection was all file-based. So what you usually see was you actually downloaded something, usually an executable. The executable was containing some sort of malicious code, and then it will executing, and of course it would infect. It would infect an endpoint. So in that context, having a file system scanner could actually make sense. And the file system scanner, what it did was just taking this piece of binary, scan it, and see if contained any sort of known binary pattern that was associated with a malicious behavior, or a malicious code, or malicious malicious binary. But with the advent of in-memory execution and file-less malware, this kind of technique was very soon obsolete. And so all antiviruses were enriched with sort of heuristic or in-memory scanning. As you know, for example, one of the best example of that is the anti-malware scan interface provided by Windows itself, that allows antiviruses to actually scan even binaries that are dynamically loaded in memory, especially if they are script-based or C#-based. And also the antiviruses was enriched with sandbox analysis, which could actually start analyzing the behavior of certain binaries, cloud-based features, and AI models, and machine learning models that can not only detect known malware, but even stop proactively unknown malware, which share the same characteristic as previously seen malware. Of course, even EDR went to a similar evolution. Back in the day, in 2013, EDR was just they're just a huge software. We were still huge software, but they were just composed by agents, which were just collecting events on an endpoint, and then a centralized engine, which was nothing more than a huge knowledge base of rules and a correlation engine that could actually correlate these rules following certain patterns that were used and defined for the most part, and classify a set of events as malicious or not based on this huge set of rules. Of course, now, of course, in recent years, these EDRs were reached by a lot of different sources for telemetry, and they're using a lot more techniques like userland hooking or kernel callbacks or ETWTI, a lot of other sources to collect telemetry, and they are no more just relying on static rules, but they also have a sort of AI and ML features that can dynamically detect if there is a through behavioral analytics. They automatically can detect if a certain behavior is malicious or not. So they are more powerful than before, of course. And if you combine the two, so if you combine all the things that you actually get through the next generation AV, which are prevention, of course, endpoint forensics, threat analytics, etc., with all the features offered by an EDR, so threat hunting, the detection, as I said, the behavioral analytics, and the data collection through a lot of telemetry, you get what is called an endpoint platform protection. So you should never actually think that an endpoint platform protection is something that is to put in comparison with an EDR. Usually an endpoint platform protection comes with an EDR, and if you don't have an EDR as part of an endpoint platform protection, you should consider actually integrating it with one. So of course there are a lot of vendors, as you know, around endpoint platform protection. There are a lot of managed security service provider, and there are a lot of EDR vendors there that are willing to offer you this kind of solution to monitor your environment. But how can you actually understand or see which one is the right for you, which one is better? So, and this is where the Mitre ingenuity framework actually comes to utility, like comes and solve this problem for us, or at least attempts to solve this problem for us. So Mitre is an independent organization. It's been there for a long while. It was known before to collect CVE and to sort of standardize the way, like to collect them and all vulnerabilities that were around, and also CWE. But it's even more known now because of the Mitre attack framework, which is a collection of all the tactics, techniques, and procedures that are used to describe a behavior of a threat actor when performing an attack. This was actually incredibly valuable because it gave us like a common ground to understand how to describe the behavior of a threat actor, and we use that even during red teaming to actually describe what kind of steps and what kind of action, what kind of behavior we're using during a red team and an adversary simulation exercise. The ingenuity framework is not, of course, was developed from there. And the ingenuity framework is an independent evaluation that should give you an insight about what are the raw capabilities of an EDR. Of course, there are a lot of different vendors that are analyzed. So these are the vendors analyzed in 2022. And as you can see, there are a lot of well-known names, but there are something that you should know to actually evaluate the results. So if you want the raw results, here I have a table for you that describes the detection rate of any EDR and the prevention rate of any EDR. But if you remember, during this evaluation, a lot of these vendors were actually claiming to have reached 100% in something, in detection based on tactic, in detection based on other patterns, or in visibility. A lot of them were actually saying we give 100% visibility over an attack. So of course, if you see here, there is just one 100%, which is cyber reason in first position, and it's detection, 100% detection. So what it means detection, what it means prevention, what it means visibility. So of course, Mitre doesn't give you any score. Mitre is completely vendor independent. It will never give a score or saying that an EDR is better than another, because this is not the point of it. So what the Mitre does is that they create a simulated environment, they install these EDRs, and then they run an emulated attack, an emulated APT attack. And they will register, like they will record step by step of the attack if the EDR see or detect a specific technique or procedure, even because it goes to that level, to substeps. And for each substeps, you can get different results based on the kind of technique. If you have a tactic detection, technique detection, general detection, or uncategorized detection, or you get telemetry. So telemetry is what gives visibility over a step, and means that there is telemetry, that the sensor actually collected some data, which was not processed, but that collected some data over the step of the attack, while the technique detection or general detection means that there was an alert generated by that particular technique. So what is better? It's better to get an EDR which has a high detection rate or a high telemetry. What is better? So we will actually, bear with me for a second, we will actually give a response to that. But before doing that, so as you can see, the first like 15 candidates have a very high detection rate. We're talking about higher than 85%. And if you look from the number 12, we have higher detection than 90%. So you would expect that this kind of EDR perform really well against real attacks. So is that true? They perform this well against real attacks? So you would expect that if EDR are becoming so good, the number of successful attacks during time will be probably lower. But here there is a counterintuitive like data that says that the actual success of a ransomware attack, for example, is actually increasing over time. From 2016 to 2021, we have a successful attack. The frequency of successful attack is actually becoming lower. Like it's actually becoming higher. And if we look at real attacks that have happened in 2022, we are actually seeing some sort of concerning data. For example, this, if you remember the Lapsus group was an hacking team very active in the UK, and they are known now to have hacked companies of the caliber of NVIDIA Corporation and Okta. And during an attack, Bill Demirkapi, which is a researcher by Microsoft, actually published these results where he uncovered that these guys, after compromising a company, they were actually shutting down the EDR installed in their endpoints by just downloading ASACA, which is a tool that potentially a lot of you have used. I use it any day probably. And it's a sort of task manager, improved task manager with a lot of different features, but they just downloaded it from GitHub and just shut down the EDR by right-clicking to it. Of course, one thing to note is that you need admin permission to do that. You can't just download it and disable the EDR. You should have at least admin level. Of course, you will escalate to system, because from admin to system is not a security boundary by Microsoft, and then you will just shut down the EDR agent that way. But the thing that is concerning is that these guys could actually download ASACA like that, because if you upload ASACA in VirusTotal, for example, you will notice that this is not really clean binary. Like a lot of security solutions actually classify this as malicious. Well, not FireEye if you're a careful observer, you will see that FireEye doesn't classify this as malicious. And another, like, even more recent data is we have it from 5 October 2022, where we see that this is an article of like this month. A ransomware group bypasses an enormous range of EDR tools, and how they do it. I want, like, this group is Blackbyte, and I want you to oblige your, like, to check this kind of this pieces in this article. And the technique used was the bring your own driver. They exploited CVE 2019-16-098, which is a vulnerability of 3 years ago. And they borrowed EDR bypass techniques from EDR Sandblast, which is a public available tool, which has been in GitHub potentially for 2 years. But this is not the problem. Like, they actually loaded a well-known vulnerable driver, even if it's validly signed and whatever, and they use that vulnerability. So CVE 2019 is a vulnerability that in article C6.sys that allows for arbitrary read and write kernel memory, and using that they add kernel level access. So they just used it to just shut down any provider used by ETW threat intelligence, which is very powerful. We will see how to classify this kind of bypass in like very soon in the next slides. But what is concerning is that there should be a protection to guarantee that you can't load a well-known vulnerable driver. So indeed, if you try to load in Windows, for example, an unsigned binary, what you should end up with is something like that, right? So you try to load a non-signed driver, and what you get is, listen, this is MDE by instance, but of course a lot of EDR actually have an alert set for this. So you try to load an unsigned binary, an unsigned driver, and you get a very big alert. So if this is true, why these attacks? Like, the question that is natural to answer is, why this attack happens even if EDR has 100% detection rate or 100% visibility? So it's very strange, right? Because these are very visible attacks, right? And what I want you to consider is that your company, any company, has a very specific environment. So one of the limitations of the Mitre ingenuity attack is that it gives you, yes, a raw insight of the capabilities of an EDR, but it doesn't actually tell you how this EDR will perform in your environment. Of course, your environment is not a simulated environment. It is surely more noisier, it's messier, and not because it's messy, but because it's more dynamic. Of course, you have people leaving, people joining, you have server dismissed, server added, you have migrations in place, you have a lot of things happening. So you can't expect to have the same environment of the simulated environment created by Mitre ingenuity, right? So from a certain side, you have this EDR with a lot of visibility, so like 100% telemetry, 100% visibility, but they don't hit the 100% detection. And on the other side, you have this like Cybereason or Sentinel-1, very good solution, that they have an incredible technique, like an incredible detection rate. And we're talking about like 100%, right? But would this tool be able to stop everything off the shelf? Well, this is not a right expectation to have for this kind of tool. So if you have a lot of visibility but no detection, what you should ask yourself is, oh, all right, I have a lot of visibility, a lot of telemetry, but is my EDR actually detecting what needs to be detected? Or I need to put some effort in actually creating custom detection rules that apply to my environment and can actually detect an attack without giving me 100 million alerts. On the other side, if you have like an EDR with 100% detection rate, what you want to ask yourself is, All right, but when I install this in my environment, what is the true positive, false positive ratio? Is this good enough to actually detect everything without overloading my blue team of alert that needs to be every time evaluated and classified? This is a very good question, and the answer is that you always need to take these tools, but they are not fail-proof. They are not just already ready to be configured. Like they are not or just ready to go. You always need to spend some time to actually get a baseline of how these EDR are actually performing in your environment, and how you need to adapt these tools to avoid overloading, avoid blue team overloading, and actually increase accuracy, and try to understand how to apply this tool with your company environment, your company staff, and all other overlapping controls that you might have in place. So you always need to consider that when investing in an EDR tool. And because there are all these configurations that need to be done on an EDR, of course, this gives us a lot of opportunities for actually engineering our bypasses, right? So now we will talk about actually how we approach this evasion engineering when performing a red team engagement or purple team engagement, and how we can actually find and exploit insecurity gaps in these products. So to actually give you a good overview about this, I want to introduce you to the funnel of fidelity, which is a term coined by Jared Atkinson by SpecterOps. And this funnel of fidelity is an attempt to describe all the steps around incident detection and response. And it starts with collection, which is when like a sensor is actually collecting telemetry to be further processed by the EDR itself. And it goes to detection. And this phase is when actually the sensor using the detection, the built-in detection by the EDR, can actually detect that something malicious is happening and just raise an alert. Then there is the triage phase, which is usually done by a SOC level 1, level 2 analyst. That just is a way to enrich this alert with more contextual data, so that like to the next step, the investigator can actually have more data to analyze. And then if the triage says, all right, based on the contextual data, this is actually an incident, the triage will raise an incident that will go to a SOC level 3 analyst probably, that will actually try to enrich even more this incident with data which cannot be easily analyzed. Sometimes it's like this kind of data can just be acquired manually. And after the investigation, if everything is still, the incident is true, etc., all this data will be passed upon to an incident responder that will ensure that every remediation step that are needed are just applied in a timely manner. Because of course we are talking about a security incident, we have an attacker inside the network, we need to respond and we need to act quick, right? So at each stage we have some bypass opportunity, of course, right? And thanks to the work of Jonathan Johnson, still by SpecterOps, we are able to engineer this process and to classify it in a unified manner, right? So in the collection phase, when we have the sensor collecting telemetry, we can have what we call collection bypass. What is a collection bypass? A collection bypass is an attempt to avoid the sensor to grab the telemetry needed for further processing. And here we have two cases: missing telemetry. Missing telemetry happens when the attacker or the malware developer can find a way to avoid the telemetry, like the telemetry collection, the telemetry generation logic by a security sensor, by a sensor. So for example, let's imagine that I have a sensor that is actually using userland hooking to grab telemetry around what I'm doing. And we are using like sort of code execution and process injection technique. And I have a security program hooking kernel 32 Windows API, right? Well, if I use NTDLL exported functions instead of the kernel 32 exported functions, I bypass the security tool. All right, and what about if the program is hooking NTDLL? Well, I can still use syscalls to bypass this kind of telemetry generation. So if I have something like that, I bypass the telemetry. This is one of the most powerful kind of bypass that I can have, because if telemetry is not generated or collected, then this data cannot be processed further, and this thing will never alert a human, and will never generate an alert, right? There is another scenario when I can miss the collection, which is actually missing collection, right? And the same scenario, right? But this time I have a nuke in kernel 32, and my malware is actually executing function in kernel 32, but the sensor is not configured to send that data back, to collect that data and send it back to the detection engine. In this case, I have a missing collection, but this is something that can be actually fixed, because it's a configuration-based problem. So a security, like a detection, like the guys that are in like the blue team can actually operate a configuration change over the sensor and can allow for that detection to take place. But in each case, if I have a collection bypass, this is very, very concerning, right? The second step is bypass in the logic, in the detection layer. So the detection layer, as you know, of course, there is a lot of telemetry generated by an endpoint, and then there are a set of algorithms that are meant to actually filter out all this telemetry and just provide a sort of trigger an alert based on certain conditions, right? So one of the first algorithm in place in this phase is tainting. So every kind of telemetry is tainted and sometimes clustered to have a more to improve the meaning of this telemetry. And once this is actually sent to the detection engine, this tainted data will actually be passed through a set of conditions, like set of conditions. And if the conditions are met for a certain detection logic, then the detection will spawn an alert based on that detection logic. So here we have what we call logic bypass or detection bypass. We have a missing detection. When this can happen? Well, let's consider a case. In this case, I will consider MDE, but a lot of other EDRs are like that. MDE back in like 3 months ago. So we have, for example, a code injection kind of code. As you can see, you have the standard code injection technique. So we open an handle to a process, to a target process. We allocate a virtual memory inside the target process address space. We write some shellcode we want to execute, and then we execute that shellcode using create remote thread, so as a thread. This is practically the vanilla shellcode injection, process injection, and is probably the first one used in the process. It is a technique that is known by anyone. And we can see that if we try to execute that, of course, MDE will detect that a process was injected with potentially malicious code. And this is expected, right? But when you face something like that, you should always ask yourself, yes, but what were the conditions that triggered this detection? And I can tell you that till 3 months ago, I think it's still applicable today, but till a few months ago, the main reason why this was triggered was not really the behavioral analysis of open process. Of course, that was part of the conditions, right? But the critical condition that should be met for this alert to trigger was that the remote thread had to be executed by an unbacked memory region, right? So if you try to actually see in process hacker, exactly, this is process hacker. So if you try to see the memory region allocated in the target process, in this case, Teams, you will see that we allocated our shellcode in an unbacked memory region. Unbacked means that there is no file on the disk that is actually representing our code, executable code in memory. So it's a pure, it's executable code which resides purely in memory, right? And here there is no, like, you would see the back file here in the use, but there is no file because of course this shellcode is not backed in memory. And this was the main reason why MDE could actually detect this from being a process injection technique. Indeed, if we try to use this code, which is still open process, like the behavior is the same, but this time we are just targeting a specific function inside ADV API 32, right? And same process, we open the process handle, we change the memory protection on ADV API 32, we write into it, and we execute it, we create remote thread. We have the same behavior, like still open process, still write process memory, still create thread. But this time, just because we have a backed memory region in like supporting our code in memory, MDE would not trigger the alert, meaning that we have a detection, we have a bypass opportunity for this detection, because the detection itself, there is no rule currently, actually, like we're talking about months ago, but we didn't have a detection rule in place to support this kind of injection technique. So you always need to be careful about how specific is your detection in place, because sometimes EDR have a very good detection, but of course, you don't know what kind of detection it is. So you should actually attempt a lot of things to see if there is any bypass opportunity. And when there is a bypass opportunity, you need to create a detection yourself if you want this to be alert, to given as an alert. After that, to the next level, we have the triage phase, and we have the classification bypass. Classification bypass happens when I don't have the triager, so the SOC level 1, level 2 analyst doesn't have enough information to actually say this is malicious, this is not malicious, right? And here we have a missing classification. And yes, usually is based because I don't have contextual data to say if this is event, is this event is malicious or not. It can be because, for example, I actually don't have network data that supports a specific behavior, because, for example, something is happened on the endpoint, but it's something that was caused remotely or not. I don't know. I don't have network data. I can't add context to it. Or because, for example, it's blending in with normal behavior. Oh, I've seen PSExec. Someone actually executed code using PSExec. Yes, it's one of our IT administrator. Oh, then it's fine, because we always have IT administrators managing things with PSExec, even PSExec. So you understand, if you are a pen tester, you know how it's noisy, how PSExec is noisy. But if you are in an environment where administrators actually still use PSExec to manage the environment, then it's very difficult to understand if it's something malicious or not, right? Especially if an IT administrator account was compromised. And this is actually the same case of Lapsus. They downloaded Process Hacker, but we don't know if what account was compromised, for example. We're missing this data. So what if it was an IT administrator being compromised? And what if it was usual for IT administrators to download Process Hackers or other tools from GitHub? We don't know that, but it might be actually that the reason why it wasn't caught before it was too late. And this is the reason why I say you should always configure these EDRs based on your environment, and you should be aware of enriching them, not creating loopholes yourself. So on the next step, we have the investigation phase, and we have what we call temporal bypass. So yeah, the attack was detected, the triage phase was completed successfully, the incident was generated, but now there is a window, right? There is a time window where, yes, I was detected, but what if I have still the time to achieve my objective before I'm dropped out of the network. For example, an attacker may want to just exfiltrate some data. And if they found the data and start exfilling that, if the incident was actually confirmed and the remediation process takes place, if the attacker can exfil that data before you quarantine that endpoint, the game is finished already. So there is still an opportunity for bypassing, which is not a real bypass in the strict sense, right? Because we've been caught, but there is still a bypass in the terms that we can actually achieve our objective before the endpoint is quarantined. Or for example, I might be able to clean my activity and move laterally to another endpoint before they drop me out of the network, which is another condition that can happen. And the last one is the technical bypass. The technical bypass can happen even in the investigation phase, to be honest. So I'm just putting it here because it's natural to put it sequentially, but the technical bypass can happen even before, because the attack is detected, but the responder or the investigator doesn't have the skills to actually understand what is happening and understand how to adequately respond to the attack. And this as well is not really a bypass in the strict sense, but it's something that needs to be taken into account, right? So, and this is the reason why you should always invest in your blue team and into upskilling your blue team, because this kind of situation can happen, and you can't just rely on the tool to prevent you from being breached, because this is not what this kind of tools are made for. These are made for preventing most of the stuff and detecting what it can prevent, so that your human team can actually action, because they have a lot of information to action. But yeah, that's what it does. That's what it's designed to do. And there is a last one, which is actually like transversal to all the phases, which is what we call procedural bypass. And a procedural bypass happens when there is a control, procedure, or process that, or just a machine that just fails to identify a threat. So of course, it's similar to collection bypass, but it's not like that I'm evading. Like, the difference is that I'm not trying to evade the telemetry. It's just that I'm doing something so different that this is practically not collected, not analyzed at all. And something like that may be potentially, for example, because I'm delegating the security of a particular kind of thing to something else, to some other procedure, some other control. For example, in the example we've seen before with Blackbyte, so the vulnerable driver loaded into the system should actually be, yes, of course, the EDR can have a sort of telemetry to actually say the driver was loaded, and I'm sure it has, but probably it wasn't configured to alert on a vulnerable driver being loaded. And there might be a reason for that, because Windows already has a security system for that, which is called HDCI, Hypervisor Enforced Code Integrity. If enabled, will prevent a known vulnerable driver from being loaded. So probably the EDR was just not aware of this particular technique, because that should be a prevention already enabled into Windows. So if you enable HDCI, you should be already good for that kind of attack, right? I'm just guessing here because we don't know exactly what happened in that kind of environment for that kind of attack, but it can be one possible explanation. And if it's like that, it would probably fall into procedural bypass, because at that point I'm delegating that security to something else, so I'm failing to actually detect that attack, because it's not my responsibility to detect that attack. There should be another protection doing that. And so if these are the opportunities for bypass we have. So what we should actually do going toward the future to help companies to get a better security posture? Well, I have advices, of course, for everyone. And my key recommendation for vendors, for EDR vendors, are Please join the meter ingenuity evaluation. Of course, a lot of them are already doing that. And we've seen actually the meter ingenuity, it's a very good way of for marketing, but it's also like one of its strong point is that it's actually helping out everyone getting to a sort of baseline. So it's very helpful for vendors to like challenge with others and make their product better and stuff like that. And also to join a bug bounty program. I honestly, being on bug bounty for a while, I've actually seen improvement. For example, SentinelOne, which has a public bug bounty, actually improved a lot because they accepted vulnerability like bypass opportunity on the EDR agent, reported by independent security researcher, and they are improving while we are like while time passing. SentinelOne is improving a lot, and this is just one sample. Of course, I'm not saying that others are not doing the same. I'm just saying that as one sample, they are actually improving a lot their security, and they are reducing their attack surface and the opportunity for bypasses. For customers, I always say run a periodical adversary simulation program, because you need to understand not only how the EDR is configured, how it responds, what kind of alert it gives, etc., but also how your blue team is able to see and detect these attacks and how it's able to actually respond to these attacks. So it's really important to have an adversary simulation program run periodically in your environment. And do not rely on off-the-shelf security solution, because we've seen, you don't know. Even if you check the best solution for meter ingenuity, there is no guarantee it will actually perform as good as that in your environment. And please do stop invest in tooling. Like, of course, do invest in an endpoint protection platform, EDR, etc. I'm not saying you shouldn't, but stop investing more tooling. Don't overdo it. Just please start investing in your blue team. Give them the visibility over the tools you have, and give them the training they need to actually start using the data they have, which I assure it's a lot, to start preventing breaches. My most difficult red teams where the blue team was actually knew what they were doing. That were my most difficult red teams. And for testing providers, stop just sell to sell, right? I mean, of course, I've been there. I'm part of it. I'm a security testing provider as well. I work for them, so I appreciate. But please don't sell just to sell. Sell what is suitable for the customer. So if you think that the customer doesn't need a red team, it might be preferable to actually sell a purple team, etc. Do sell a purple team. Try to help your customer. Try to actually help him improve. Based on their based on their needs and on their security situation, right? And just as a final note, do's and don'ts for customers, please. These are so take it lightly, take it with a grain of salt, but please don't ask for a red team if you don't have a blue team, or you just have formed a blue team and it's very immature kind of thing. Instead, what you should do is ask for a purple team, because a purple team is a collaboration between the red team and the blue team, and it's actually what can actually help your blue team to flourish, to standardize your processes, to harden your processes, and to help your blue team to actually start detecting what it's important to detect, right? And don't ask for a red team if you just want an EDR testing, because this is not what the red team is meant for. Instead, ask for an EDR testing, because we do that. Honestly, we like bypassing these solutions. So if you want an EDR testing, you want to see how well the EDR performs, just ask for that, because the solution for that is there. We just don't involve red teaming and blue teaming. We'll just get in your network and testing your EDR if we have just that. And if you want a real red team, please don't narrow the scope so much that it's an unrealistic representation of your environment, because this is a red team by default is a simulation of what an attacker should do. And if you just want me to attack a specific door, it's not going to work, because a real attacker would never go for the strongest door, strongest gate in your system. They will always enter from the window left open. It's always like that. So if you don't have the budget for a real red team, for longer engagement, my suggestion is always ask your provider to provide you a long-term relationship where you can have a long-term engagement with an overall increasing scope or incremental scope. So you decide exactly what to test and what to add to any specific phase. By using a phased approach and an incremental scope, you can actually reach 100% coverage using an adversary simulation instead of a normal pen test or just not relevant like red team with a narrow scope and no meaningfulness to it. And thanks a lot. This is all for me. If you have any question, feel free to ask.
Alessandro, thank you very much. That was a fascinating exposition. And I thought your do's and don'ts were really good, in particular about that relationship with your providers to help you develop. And I think, you know, knowing where you are, I thought the couple of points which I came out of that was, first of all, knowing your environment is absolutely critical. Yeah. And the other one is configuring your systems appropriately to that environment. And yes, that's the kind of assistance that I think people should be looking at. I mean, am I right in saying that this is very much EDR, EPP is looking at the perimeter of?
Well, it's both. As you know, the EDR is a lot focusing on endpoint. So it doesn't actually care if it's an endpoint situated on the perimeter or if it's an internal. It just look at endpoint. So wherever you install the agent, you will be able to detect if there is anything happening on the agent. I think that EDR nowadays are actually looking at 360 degrees on what is happening on an endpoint. Like back in the day, I was configuring a similar solution like ArcSight and AlienVault, and I'd seen with my eyes how much they've evolved. And now the insight they can give you on your internal endpoints, on your internal assets is massive. But what I've seen is that a lot of time, clients are just there trying to say, oh, you managed to get the A. It's incredible because we had this tool. Why? It's not a matter of the tool. Who was watching the dashboard? And we have 2 people. How many alarms? 100,000. That is the explanation, right? So they can't, if you can't tune the tool and you don't have personnel enough to actually look at this alert and see what actually is to when they have to take action and when they don't need to take action, the tool itself can do much, right?
Thank you, Alessandro. Thank you very much. Well, we've kind of run out of time for this webinar, but I really want to thank you very much for your explanation and putting forward that. I think for organizations that will be incredibly useful. And I think I take your point. If you don't configure it right, you don't really know when you're getting false positives or the reality, and you can waste a lot of time in that. Yes. And we've seen businesses that have had problems with that, where they've probably poorly configured their tools. I thought your point specifically about don't invest in more tools, invest in your blue team. Really good point. Yeah. Invest in your people to make sure that you get the maximum out of what you've already purchased or already being supported through. But anyway, I'd just like to say thank you very much, Alessandro, and to everybody else for attending, and look forward to the next webinar.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. And do make sure that you fill in the feedback. That's really important for all of us. Thank you very much indeed, everybody.